Good morning. That was good. So first, let me say that I'm really honored to speak to all of you this morning. I have a tremendous amount of respect for the work that each of you do every day in providing services to our kids in residential care. I think your work is some of the most difficult, most demanding, most challenging, and yet I believe also probably the most important, and I also think probably the most rewarding work that you might ever do in your life. Working in residential care is where I started my career and where I have spent a good deal of my waking hours since then. When I got out of college in the 70s, that's the 1970s, the economy was not so good. My plan at that time was to be a teacher, which didn't pan out. And I did a great deal of substitute teaching for about 2 years until I finally just had to kind of make a decision and pull the plug and find something else to do. And eventually I took a job that I never knew existed, doing work that I had never heard of. That job was as a house parent in a group home on Long Island, working with teenage boys. And as a house parent, I would live in the group home for 3.5 days a week and have a couple hours off during the day when the residents were at work or school, unless, of course, if they were sick, and then we stayed with them. And as you all know, I think the importance of teaching our kids what it means for when they leave, independent living skills. And when I started doing that work, there was a lot of independent living skills that I needed to learn. The main one being, and very important when you're dealing with teenagers, was how to cook. And so I remember every day, I used to call my mom to kind of say, okay, tonight is meatloaf. Where do I start? And the next one would be, how do I roast a chicken? And how do I make a tray of lasagna? All the basics. Nothing fancy. I've never gotten past that. Thank God my wife does. But besides learning how to cook, I learned a great deal about myself in that job, more than I could ever have imagined. Counseling kids, responding to crises, working with fellow staff, dealing with each kid but in the context of the group, waking up in the middle of the night to do bed checks, making sure everybody was where they were supposed to be, running house meetings. Maybe one of the most difficult things was balancing petty cash. I think that's a skill in and of itself. If you can do that, you can run an agency, believe me. And most of all, I think trying to respond calmly to kids when they pushed every button that I'd even know I had. While I was not there for me in that position, there was no way that I could ever be of any help to them unless I understood what made me tick and what ticked me off. And it was not long before I realized that the work was just a great fit, better than, I think, whatever I could have gotten out of teaching. And it was how I ended up being in this field, and really has shaped me in terms of my politics, who I am as a person, as a man, and as a CEO. I tell a story to a couple of people. When I started Mercy First about 6 years now, one of the first things I got was, I don't know, it must have been 8 or 10 letters from some of the kids on campus. And it might have been Grammatico or Birmingham, one of the cottages, and it was, "Dear Mr. McCaffery, dear Mr. McCarthy, dear Mr. McCaffery, dear Mr. 47 different variations on the theme. Welcome to Mercy First. We're delighted to have you. And it's great that you're here. And by the way, we need a new TV set. And if you get us a new TV set, particularly one of the big plasma TV sets, you can watch football with us, and you'll always be welcome to come by. And kid drawing of Superman, you'll be our hero." And so actually, the other night I went through my emails. I found the note that I had sent to the program manager, the next day, saying, it really was nice of the kids to kind of do that. But if you would let them know that I don't do TV sets, they really need to deal with their staff around TV sets. and let them know too that I don't have a plasma TV set, and they're probably not going to get one either. But I think that has been my whole approach, which is, those day-to-day decisions are really for you to do, not for me. My job is to help you have the resources you need to do your job, but my job is not to make decisions that you should be doing. Kids need to know who they need to deal with, and that's you, not me. Of course, when I started as a house parent, after a while, I must say that not everything was, so positive and upbeat as I might kind of put it out there. As long as you promise not to say where you heard it. I remember after being on the job for a while, and after a couple of rough nights, I remember coming to my director and said, I really think that we should be able to take out one kid outside. No questions asked. No repercussions. Because I had reached the end. And she looked at me and said, you really need to take some time off. And needless to say, that suggestion was a good one. And I think was one way that I learned that I needed to take care of myself in order to be able to take care of anyone else. But that was then, and this is now. And while I think there are many lessons that I learned when I did this work that still apply today, much has changed in the kinds of kids that each of you work with every day, and the kinds of challenges and pressures that you face every day on the job. The main difference, I think the big difference, are the needs of the kids these days, and the problems and the challenges that they present are far different, far more complex, and incredibly more difficult than they ever were. Just 10 years ago, never mind 35 years ago, the kinds of kids and their needs have really changed dramatically. 10 years ago, there were 28,000 kids in foster care. Today, there's less than half that number, less than 14,000. In residential care, 10 years ago, there were 4,300 children in residential care. And today, there's 1,250, a reduction of 70%. And these changes mean a lot in terms of who you see every day. 10 years ago, we could have a cottage or a group home where we could have one or two kids with almost any issue that you could possibly think of. There were very few things that we couldn't handle with one or two kids. We used to say that we could handle one or two of anything, almost regardless of their problems and issues. And today, that is who all the children are. We have a larger percentage of kids with serious emotional issues, larger percentage on psychotropic meds. Almost every kid that comes into residential care has been through numerous failed placements in foster homes before they come to us. And mostly they come into residential care after every other option has been exhausted. And perhaps more important, more kids than ever have no viable family available to them who are willing to work with them, who are willing to stay involved. And certainly fewer family members who are willing or able to serve as a discharge resource for those kids. And this last part, I think, really adds to kind of a level of hopelessness that many of our kids have to face that is difficult and impossible for us to kind of ignore. The pressure is also on us from every public agency, ACS, DSS, OMH, probation, you name it, to do everything we do, but to do it better and to do it quicker. But without any additional funding to beef up staffing, provide more mental health services, more tutoring, more recreation, or any other services that could help with those goals. Shorter lengths of stay are a fact of life now that affects residential care and everything we do. Where we were once able to have successful residents mentor new kids coming into the program and get them to buy into what was going on, today our successful residents go home or step down before their success has even stabilized in school or in the program. Never mind being around to mentor anyone. For some time now, as you know, residents that were once in more secure facilities are now the ones coming to campuses. Kids that were once on campuses and group homes are now in family foster homes with higher expectations all around in terms of what happens. Some of this is actually not so bad for some kids. 2 years ago, though, ACS eliminated contracts for 3/4 of all the group home beds that they contracted with. It was a level of care that really worked well for older teens who had been through far too many foster homes, who had not been able to engage those kids. They wanted their space, they wanted to try to focus on what they needed to do in life. And many of them were able to be successful with that. And that's an option that's really extremely limited at this point. All of us are working hard to keep the needs of our residents in mind as we struggle to connect with kids that have been traumatized by a life that has seen too much abuse and neglect and not enough success and positive adults or peers in their lives. They come to you angry, defiant, and suspicious of any adult that wants to connect with them. And who can blame them? I always tell people that if I grew up in the same circumstances that most of our kids did, I doubt that I would be any different than they are. We are asked to stabilize them, make them feel safe, improve their education, reduce AWOLs, teach them how to handle conflict in a positive way, work with their family, and do all this quicker so they can move on. And despite that, or maybe because of it, I still say that while the work that each of you do is some of the most difficult, most challenging work there is to do, I still believe that there is nothing that is more important and rewarding than the work that you are doing ever, probably in your life. And I say this because I have seen time and time again, as you have, the power that one positive adult can have in changing the life of a youth from one of anger and despair to one of hope and promise. The difficult part is that we never know which kids will turn around, and so we have to put our efforts into each of them. I think we've all worked with kids who, because of their history of trauma, something that you never ever get used to, that they would seem to have little chance of turning things around, and yet they do. And on the other hand, we see kids who, in the overall scheme of things, have not gone through as much as others have, but who are just unable to put one foot in front of the other and begin to take responsibility for where they are in their life. When it all comes down to all the external and organizational changes and challenges being placed on you, the focus is always on improving outcomes. How do we improve what we're doing? It's hard to argue with doing better. Of course we want to do better. The issue is how to decide what practices we need to keep because they work. And how do we decide which ones we have to let go of to be replaced at ones that work better. I believe that doing this requires us to be smart about what we do. I always hate the term of, doing more with less. I hate the phrase, doing more with less. Jim Purcell, who's the CEO of COFCCA, once said that if we follow the line of reasoning of doing more with less, eventually we get to do everything with nothing, which of course is impossible. We cannot do more with less, but we can be smart about what we do with what we have. For most of us working in organizations that have been around for 50, 75, or over 100 years, it's most important for us to remember that if we were still doing today what we were doing back then, we wouldn't be here. And there are many examples of agencies that closed over the years because they could just not keep up with what was being asked of them and the challenges they face. Change is inevitable. And a famous quote from Star Trek, "Resistance is futile." That was from the board. Nasty group of people. Change is inevitable, resistance is futile. I believe that we can never look at what we do and how we do it as a finished product. Each of our organizations must see ourselves and everything we do as a work in progress. Or we're going to miss seeing a better way of doing things for the sake of our kids. But how do we decide what practices we should keep and strengthen, and yet be willing to let go of some of the ways that we do things in order to do new things? How do we figure out which practices we are holding on to are getting in the way of learning new approaches based on better understandings of what makes kids tick? And it's a hard balance to find. When I think of how best to deal with change we are faced with, because I've been around a while, I think of this book I read a long time ago called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Who heard of it? Well, 4 of us, okay? That book and another one were written by a guy, Robert Pirsig. And the book was about his journey with his son going cross-country on motorcycles. The relationship between the father and the son was very strained. The father had just gotten out of a hospital, and they were doing this trip as a way of trying to get himself back on track with his life and in a relationship with his son. And in these books, Pirsig explored this whole concept of quality. What is it? A term that he decided was kind of indefinable. But he eventually got around to talking about 2 kinds of quality: static quality and dynamic quality. And as I look at that and try to apply it to the work that we do, static quality are those things that have proven their worth to us over time. In our work, it's the things that we do that have demonstrated their value in our ability to engage kids and effectively deal with each other, the staff. Things like treating each other and kids with respect as we'd want to be treated ourselves. Doing what we say we're going to do when we say we're going to do it. Paying attention to the little things. Turning a page. Paying attention to the little things that take place and addressing them when they arise, not putting it off. Focusing on the positive and not the negative. Working as part of a team with strong communication and doing all these things on a consistent basis. The list goes on, but those are the key pieces for me. Dynamic quality are those new understandings and techniques that can improve what we do and how we do them. A good example of dynamic quality is what we went through at Mercy First and what other agencies have done as well in adopting Sanctuary, a trauma-informed approach to understanding what a youth is going through so we're better able to respond to them. The approach does not excuse what a young person does, which some of us, as we talked through this at the agency, first kind of saw it as. But it gives each of us a better framework to understanding the basis of their behavior, and therefore helps us to be better able to respond in a more effective way. When a kid gives you a hard time, is it because they're just pushing your buttons, or is it because they just got off their phone with their mom who told them that they're not going to be able to see them again this weekend? Understanding the reason for the kid's behavior makes all the difference in the world in deciding how best to respond what they are doing with you. And I think the pressure we sometimes feel on the job with the changes we face is this tension between static quality and dynamic quality, old versus new. In the face of major change, we can sometimes dig in our heels and keep with what we know. Instead, we need to really take a close look at the techniques and approaches we use that work with kids and ask if they should remain or be changed. And at the same time, we need to explore new understandings and techniques that are out there that might allow us to use what we know in a more effective way. I suggest that you kind of keep this view in mind as you face changes on the job. And like Sanctuary, it doesn't tell you how to handle everything that comes up. It does, however, give you a framework to figure out what we need to do and what we need to change. Sometimes we don't recognize the new approaches that come our way, like Sanctuary. They can help us deal with the challenges we face. It reminds me of a story. And it's a good time because it's a story of a hurricane approaching a small town. And for those of you we just got our emails out to staff yesterday on there is this hurricane approaching, we need to review our emergency plans, how we're doing with supplies, you name it. Oh, I see a lot of heads turning. Oh, we didn't get that email. But there was a hurricane threatening a small town, and everyone was deciding to leave for safety, except one man who said to his neighbors, hey, I've always survived these storms, and I have faith in God that He will look after me and all will be well. And as the rains poured down and the water levels started to rise, a man driving a Jeep by his house saw him and stopped and said, hey, can I give you a lift? You know, get out of here. It's going to be getting pretty tough. The man said, no, appreciate it, but you know, I've been through this stuff before. I'm praying to God, everything will be fine. You know, thanks for dropping by. The guy waved, took off on his Jeep. The rains continued. Before you know it, the guy had to move up to the second floor of his house. A little while later, a guy comes by in a boat, sees the guy in a window and says, hey man, you need a lift? You know, it's raining like crazy. You know, it's going to get dangerous. He says, nope, I've been through all this before. I'm okay. God will look after me. Everything's good. The guy said, okay. Rain kept pouring. Water kept rising. Before you know it, the guy's on the roof of his house. No let up in sight. Helicopter comes by, stops, drops a ladder, says, come on, man, get on board. You know, we got to get you out of there. He said, no, I'm fine. I've been through all this stuff before. Everything's okay. God will look after me. Well, he drowned. And when he got up to heaven and reached his maker, he said, hey, you know, I had complete faith in you. Why did you ignore my prayers? Why did you let me drown? And God leaned over and says, hey man, who do you think sent the Jeep? The boat? The helicopter? The last two things I want to leave you with is, the first is something that I have said in every place I have ever worked in talking about the problems we face in this field. And that is, it's not the kids. True, our kids are very difficult, challenging, and even dangerous and threatening at times. But they are kids. The great majority of whom do not do the best they can with what we ask them. Most times when something happens, some incident on campus or in one of the group homes, it's because the kids are dealing with pressures and issues that they just don't have the coping skills or the emotional development to know what to do with it. We are the adults. We're the ones where much more is expected of, so we can help the kids in our care. We all need to do the best we can, not only in what we do as individuals, but also in making sure that we ask our colleagues, our fellow workers, to do what they are supposed to do. And if we do not handle a situation correctly, we need to take responsibility for it. If we screw up with the kid, we need to tell them we're sorry. Own it. Apologize. It's not a sign of weakness. It's actually a sign of great strength. We all make mistakes in this field. I'm glad that director never said that I had a great idea when I suggested we take kids out. But if we expect our kids to own up to the things that they don't handle well, that they don't handle in the right way, then we have to do the same and expect our fellow staff to do the same. So remember, it's not the kids. And finally, last but not least, never lose your sense of humor with your kids and with each other. Humor can go a long way in relieving tensions and allowing us to kind of laugh. It can enable us to keep a situation in perspective and help us let go of positions that we dig our heels on. One last story. You know how to catch a monkey? The way you catch a monkey is hunters use a box with an opening at the top, big enough for the monkey to slide his hand in, and then inside the box they put a piece of food or something sparkly. The monkey sees it, he slides his hand in the box, he grabs it, and then his fist is too big to get out of the hole. So the monkey tries and pulls and is stuck. So now the monkey has a choice. Does he let go of the sparkly thing and move on? Or does he hang on and get caught? And what does the monkey do every time? He holds on to the sparkly thing. And he gets caught. And sometimes we all hang on to things that keeps us from moving forward in life or work. We rationalize it by saying, I'm doing this because, and whatever follows the because is the sparkly thing that we hang on to, which holds us back. So let it go. Change is inevitable, and resistance is futile. Thank you.